Welcome to Open Pike Night's Prime Direction, the series where we uncover the deep, dark history of what happened behind the scenes of each episode of Strange New Worlds. I'm your host, John T. Bolds, and let me introduce my co-host. First up, the man who firmly believes that the right figurine can make up for even the most neglectful parenting, Cameron Harrison.
That's right, son. Now, this is an original mint in clamshell box Kenner first run Boba Fett. So don't open it, don't play with it, just look at it and know how much Daddy loves you.
And the man who, wait, I could have sworn I just saw him, but sensors indicate there's nothing but us in the studio. So I guess Jessie Bailey just couldn't make it today. But here to detail her first foray into Star Trek, she's known to be detail-oriented, driven, and ambitious. And you'd have to be to bring Event Horizon to Strange New Worlds. Please welcome to the stage, Axelle Carolyn.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We are very excited. I do want to say real quick, I'm a big Doomsday fan, so I will definitely be looking for you next time I watch in the background, and great makeup all around. Speaking of which, so we oftentimes will ask the directors like why they think they were tapped for the episode they were given to direct for Strange New Worlds. But in your case, it seems a little obvious. You've acted in horror films. You've been a horror reporter, written your own horror stories, written horror television, directed feature films and television. What is it about the genre that you love so much?
That's a very good question. It's been my obsession since I was little. And even not having access to horror movies, I started reading horror books when I was very young. I found my dad's collection of books that he read when he was a teenager, like Dracula and Edgar Allan Poe, when I was probably 8 or 9. And a lot of it went over my head, I think, but a lot of it just stuck with me for a very long time. And I was obsessed with ghosts and skeletons. And then I figured I wanted to do something in horror when I was growing up, and I didn't really know what, and I wasn't sure if it was going to be directing, but I think it's a very difficult thing to say when you're like 20 that, hey, I'm going to be a director, because it seems so impressive and so difficult, and there were so few women doing it at the time too. So I kind of did any opportunity I got to do a job. I did some film PR as well. I think my first job was in film financing. I was a producer's assistant for about a week before I realized I was absolutely awful. And he realized it before I did, thankfully. He would be like, fix the coffee machine. And I'd be like, no, I don't drink coffee. But yeah, it's always been my passion. And I was writing from a young age, and I kept writing throughout. And then I think at some point I wrote a script that I really liked, and I felt I don't want to pass it on to someone else. I want to make that myself. And so I made a few short films to kind of prepare and get ready. And then I made my first feature, which was a very low budget ghost story that was set in Wales that we shot when I was living in London at the time. And that was it. Like the moment that I realized what directing was like, that felt like my place. That felt like the most satisfying. And it was almost like, regardless of whether or not I'm good at this, it was just like, I feel like this is what I'm meant to be doing. This is where I'm the most satisfied. At the end of the day, I'm exhausted, but I'm so happy. And that feeling has remained. And you know, as much as I love horror, I've had a couple of other passions on the side that were kind of not so much related, but like love James Bond, love Star Trek. And Star Trek started when I was in my late teens with a friend introducing me to First Contact because it had the Borg. So she felt like it was probably going to be scary enough for me to be into it. And she was totally right. And if you'd asked me when I was a teenager what kind of Star Trek episode I'd like to do, I'd be like, Spock and Kirk in a ghost ship. So you can imagine when I got the phone call that, hey, they want you for Star Trek. And it seems like it's a ghost ship episode. And I was like, could you repeat that? Because I feel like you said something that you can't possibly have said.
You reached deep into my psyche. Do I get to eviscerate James Kirk? Can I do that?
Actually.
Can I hurt every single one of them? That's going to be great.
Deeply hurt, yeah. That is an interesting, because we usually like to ask people where their first, like what their relationship with Star Trek is. So I don't know that we've ever heard somebody say First Contact is their first contact with Star Trek. How much other Trek exposure did you have after that?
After that, quite a bit. Before that, I have to say none. I grew up in Belgium, and for some reason, as much as Star Wars is huge there, Star Trek is very ignored. And I didn't even have a good concept at the time of. I felt like it's a TV show and it's old, but it's also new, and there's like movies, and like, this seems like a mess. I don't really know what it is. There's like I've heard of Spock, but that's about as far as I know about it. I don't even think I'd heard about Captain Kirk at the time. It was like my knowledge was very much zero. And my friend at the time, Liz Lott, she was Swedish and she was really into Star Trek. I don't know why, but like all her friends in Sweden were into it, and she was the one who was, you have to see something. So, at least you can tell me that you don't like it. And she picked that one specifically because of the kind of horror content. And then after that, I watched the other movies that led up to it, starting with the Next Generation crew. So it was more into Next Generation at first. Okay. And then I went backwards and I started watching the original series, and I just saw kind of episodes that I could find on VHS. And then I saw the movies. And the first movie almost stopped me from watching the other movies.
I don't think you're alone in that. It's a horror movie in its own right.
It has at least one moment that inspired this episode, which is the moment of... whatever survived did not last long. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that haunts my memories for sure.
It's such a great line. That whole sequence is so good.
Yeah. So I got to ask, with it being rebooted now, is there any chance you've got a pitch for a horror James Bond? Because I would watch that installment in a heartbeat.
Oh, man.
Oh, my God, that'd be amazing. That would be so cool.
We'll put that out there. We'll write MGM and let them know that I'll reach out to you. Well, I mean, you kind of mentioned it. Even people who don't know Star Trek know Spock, right? Now, you've worked on a number of titles, classic literature, even Sabrina the Teenage Witch is technically, I think, 4 years older than Star Trek, so an icon in her own right. But directing James Kirk and Spock, does that feel different when you're directing them, when you're in scenes with them? Do you feel like the weight or responsibility, or even just hey, Mom, look at me?
That's a good question. I'll say this. I was so eager to do a great job and so eager to kind of make them see that they'd hired the right person. Before we started work, I was working on a different show in Toronto. So I said, hey, I'm going to stop by the studio and just come say hi and meet the team. And they were like, great, this is wonderful. And they took me for a little walk around the stages, and we were talking about the episode. So I really wanted to be like, yes, all focused about the episode. Yes, I'm very serious. I know exactly how I'm going to, this is. And then we step onto the set, and it's the hallway, and I'm just full of goosebumps. And that's where you realize, oh my God, I'm on the Enterprise. Oh my God. And then we keep walking and we go to a different stage and we step on the bridge, and I started tearing up, and everybody turned, because they know everybody gets that kind of reaction. They hire people they know are going to be sensitive to that material and are going to be excited to step on the bridge. And there's no way you can work on it for years apparently and still be incredibly impressed by the captain's chair and not want to sit at it unless you really, it's always a special moment. But they all turned and they were like, oh yes, yeah, we forgot it's your first time. Yes, it's a moment. So yeah, there's part of you is very aware of the legacy and aware of the legend that surrounds those characters, but you also have to kind of forget about it when you're working, obviously, because otherwise you would never be able to do the job properly. But you also have to understand where those characters are heading, especially in the case of Spock. To know in an episode like this one, there was a lot of discussions about how much he could show his emotions and how much he could show that he was scared, because my whole point of view was, I don't think the audience is going to be scared if the characters are not scared. You live through those characters. So if you see Spock going through it with a very Vulcan attitude, there's a good chance that people will not be disturbed if they're watching someone who seems to have everything under control. So there was a line to kind of go through to find how much of that he could show. And Robbie had built the episode in a way that was very clever, where this was Spock's journey towards his Vulcan side. So he starts being reasonably human. He's having a human relationship. He is kind of drawn towards the more human side of his personality, and his exploration of his human side is pushed to its limits. And then he's brought back to reality through his use of logic, and that brings him back to his Vulcan side, as we can see in the final scenes when he's talking to Nurse Chapel, and he's much more Vulcan than he was in the beginning of the episode. So that, I guess, is a very long way of explaining that. I think you are, but you also have to try to power through it and not feel, the weight of that legacy on your shoulders.
Yeah, you got to be a professional.
Yeah.
Yes.
And with this episode being a horror episode, more so than probably any episode of Star Trek, did that give you an opportunity to do something you haven't yet been able to do with the horror genre, or approach it in a different way because it is Star Trek also?
Yes, I feel like, first of all, I think you can work with the horror tropes and put them in a new environment and it will feel fresh. So there was a degree of, we're just going to explore the technical side of horror, and we're going to explore things that maybe it's not entirely new, but in the context of a spaceship, it's entirely new. Like basically it's like The Shining or The Haunting based on a spaceship, and that makes it feel fresh all by itself. But to me, I was really interested in like that technical exercise of building tension and building fear. And the script was quite specific about the characters' journeys and the, even the scares. But there was a lot of latitude. The ghosts were not described, so I could go in there and kind of design them the way I wanted. There were a lot of scenes that were set in hallways, and we had to make them look different because we're basically always shooting in the same hallway. It's always the same stage. So you have to make it look different from one deck to another and try to come up with different ways of lighting it and of making it look spooky. The script would mention there's various ghosts that they don't notice. So I loved going with, I don't know if you noticed them, but in the beginning, when they get on the Griffin, before you see the one who's walking behind them, there's a couple of ghosts that are kind of hidden. And you might not see them, and that's totally fine. But if you see them, I'm sure it'll be a little bit of a moment of, and that's very inspired by Mike Flanagan's Haunting of Hill House. I thought it was very fun to just have ghosts that are not, you can see them, you can not see them. It might enhance your experience, or it doesn't change anything if you don't see them. It was just a pure exercise in tension and in character-based scares, and it was a pretty great challenge.
Yeah.
Okay. I do have a little follow-up to that. I don't know if you remember, Cam, David Lynch made that video about people watching movies on phones and stuff like that.
Oh, yes.
Now, if you're playing the movie on a telephone, you will never in a trillion years experience the film. It's such a sadness that you think you've seen a film on your fucking telephone. Get real.
When you're shooting a horror show or movie like this, like how much is that in your mind? Like, this is supposed to be in a dark theater on a big screen kind of thing. Does it frustrate you that knowing that some people are just going to be watching this on their phone in a car or something like that? Yeah.
I don't think about it when I'm shooting, although I'm always aware that it's probably the best it's ever going to look because you're on those, like, I don't know, $40,000-$50,000 monitors watching that.
You get to see the best version of the episode.
Pretty much. But the only thing that frustrates me is when people say, oh, it's too dark because they're watching things during the daytime without closing the curtains. Like, if you're watching a horror movie during the daytime, please close the curtains. Make sure that the reflection of your windows is not going to completely make it look like you're watching something that's just, white and bright. Because we do put a lot of effort into, and I know that when they go through color correction, that's a big thing that's being taken into account, as well as like the degree of how much do we reveal, how much do we show those ghosts, how much do we, so that's the one thing I would recommend. Wherever, if you're watching on a phone, if you're watching on a massive screen, I don't really mind. Just make sure that you're watching it in an environment that's a little bit dark so you can see it.
My son's at the age where I'm starting to introduce him to horror movies, and he keeps asking, like, can we watch the next Nightmare on Elm Street? In the middle of the day, I'm like, we got to wait till it's dark. When it's night, we will watch the next one, but not right now at noon.
Good parenting. Good parenting.
That's right there.
That's great.
Well, you talked about designing the ghost. Can you talk about the design for Rose Harper? Did you have a lot of say in that?
Yes, I did. So I know you guys spoke to Chris Fisher, and he's the one who was my first contact, I guess, with Strange New Worlds. And he'd introduced filming the episodes like, we want you to make your movie. So here's the script, here's the budget, here's the sets, here's the characters, have fun. And sometimes you get told that on TV and you realize that there's limits to what they actually mean by that. And in this case, it really was, he really bent it, and it really was the way that it worked. Of course, you work with the showrunners, and of course, Akiva and Henry mostly have a lot of things to communicate when it comes to the journey of the characters, because they know where those characters need to end up for the next episodes, and they're very specific about just their arcs throughout the episodes. But when it came to scares, they were very, very trusting, and they just said, look, you can change the lenses, you can change the lighting, you can decorate that set the way you want. We're on the Griffin, but obviously we're shooting on the sets of the Enterprise, and the stage is, you can't paint the walls. Those walls are white, and those walls reflect the light. So good luck trying to make it look dark, but you can do whatever you like for that. And in the case of the design of the ghosts, it was the same thing. It was kind of, well, we have an idea of what's on the page, but just go and make it spooky. And my main inspiration was, I remember the concept that I gave was the design of the ghost in Guillermo del Toro's The Devil's Backbone, where it just feels like it's almost like cracked porcelain, and it's pale, and it's very elegant. It's very simple. I didn't want something that was going to look too zombie-like either. So it's very ethereal, I think. And then they did a few tests, and it was very fun to see our actress for Rose Harper discovering how little she needs to do to look spooky when she's in that makeup. Like, she looked at herself in the camera, and she saw what it looked like when she just set the lines without even trying to be threatening or anything, and it just came across so creepy. So she played it very beautifully. And then working with Bernadette to design the costumes to make sure that they weren't zombie-like. So I didn't want them to be frayed or to have holes, but they just look like they've been damaged by time, and they have those kinds of she did it really nicely. I don't know how they aged.
Bernadette loves weathering stuff. She every time we talk to her, she's like, "We weathered it like this."
She's amazing, and she has solutions for everything. It's really impressive. Yeah. And then we had conversations about what the various ghosts in the background were going to look like the kind of what's the mix of different aliens, and are we going to bring, like, I didn't want anything that looked too floofy or too silly, and there's only so many scary Andorians you can have, so it's kind of just trying to find the mix of and it was all Starfleet people, so it was all uniform. But we have a couple that have like extra long arms. We have a couple that walk a little bit funny. It was fun. You could do a good assortment of different monsters in there.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. And like you mentioned, with the walls being white, the Enterprise is designed to be like a welcoming and comforting place for people. It's comforted literal generations of viewers. Go more into the challenge of what it was like to shoot the Enterprise as spooky. Like what kind of challenges did you really run into?
That was the first conversation I had with Jonathan, production designer, and Glenn, the DP. And I know Glenn was, he really resented not being able to paint those walls. But it was, look, what's fantastic is that everybody on this crew is so eager to honor the legacy of the show and to figure out what you have in mind and make it the best it can possibly be. So there's never anybody who's cutting any corners. They know that we have to make it look a certain way, and they're going to work until this works. And so I, from the start, knew that we were going to find a solution somehow. And I think it's a combination of not using bigger lights and kind of just using accent lights in the hallways, for example. And then we did things like there's a hallway that has plastic sheets hanging down that kind of looks like it's being refurbished. And we put a little bit of Atmos in there so that you have just a little bit of wind that moves it, so you never know exactly what's behind those sheets, and it was working with the sound as well to kind of make it feel like things were moving when you can't tell where something might be coming from. But yeah, one of the sets that I love the most is sick bay. I love working in there, and I love the way that we ended up lighting it. And it was all those shafts of very white light that fall on each of the beds. And so when the body sits up behind Spock, it catches the light so beautifully. I remember seeing that when I was watching it on the monitor, and I giggled out loud. I was like, oh my God, this is so good. This is exactly what I was hoping for.
Was that Gia in the body bag sitting up?
Yes.
It was for that shot?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. She does a good Michael Myers.
Yeah, it was a good spooky sit-up. It was excellent.
Very physical, and it was exactly the reference. It was exactly like sit-up like Michael Myers.
Yeah. Well, speaking of medbay and references, I mentioned this to Robbie too, because there's the scene with Spock where he turns around and suddenly there's bodies everywhere behind him when there wasn't before, which made me think, and because you mentioned TNG being one of your first Star Treks, it made me think of like the Dr. Crusher scene, a very similar scene where like they all sit up and she looks around and has to use logic to realize it's not happening. Were you thinking of that scene when you shot it, or?
Very luckily, I didn't remember that episode when we shot it. And I purposefully did not go back into watching all the horror episodes of Star Trek at the time. But I have watched it since.
Yeah. Okay.
And I know that there's a lot of similarities in the way that the episodes are set up, but it goes in very different directions. But yes, that scene made me laugh when I saw it. I thought, okay, I'm glad that I didn't see it ahead of time. And I'm glad that I think they feel very different.
Yeah.
I mean, like the blood pooling into the body bags and stuff. Yes, it definitely is like, this is not your dad's, which I guess is us. This is not our Star Trek version of that. Like, oh, no, it's darker now. So it worked very effectively.
It feels similar in that it gives me the same feeling.
Yep.
But obviously, they're two totally different things, which I think is like the right reference. Like, make me feel the same way, but in a different execution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That blood pooling in the body bags was one of the most difficult parts of the episode, actually. It doesn't seem like much, but it was a combination of figuring out between makeup and like between special effects and props, like finding the right body bag, finding the right how opaque it should be so that you can see the outline of the body, but you can't see that the body is clearly just a doll, a puppet. We made some of the parts of it a little bit wet so that you could see a little bit of the outline at the top, and then kind of making sure that you can fill those body bags without, like, the challenge was that if you actually fill the body bag with whatever liquid it is, it's going to be so incredibly heavy and you can't reset it. So it was also like they put up a little mattress that looked like a layer of blood at the bottom, and it was a whole thing, but it was so great. And again, everybody took so much time to figure it out and to make sure that you read on the page, the body bags start filling up and everybody has a different image of it. It's really interesting when you read a script, you have a very specific image that comes to your mind, but it's not necessarily the image that the props master will have, or that the special effects people will have, or some people thought, oh, it's going to pull from the top down, or it's going to like it's the body that's bleeding. So there were a lot of discussions to try to figure out how to make it happen. But I felt like, to me, the coolest way was just like the body bag itself starts filling up from the bottom up, and that's what we ended up doing.
That's so cool.
You mentioned cinematographer Glenn being sad he couldn't paint the wall, so he had to paint them with light. Can you just talk about working with him on that? Did you guys have a lot of the shared references when you were trying to describe what you wanted, or how was that related?
We did. Glenn is fantastic. I absolutely love working with him. And some cinematographers like to do all the shot listing together and be very, very kind of nit-gritty from the beginning. And in his case, he prefers to just be like, look, I'm here. You have questions. There's things we need to explore together. Let's just do it. But other than that, I'm a resource you can come to. And so I would shot list and I would come up with references, and then we'd discuss. And then he would discuss ways to make it happen practically. And it's interesting because you maybe don't spend every single day entirely in prep together the way that you sometimes do. But he's so ready when you get started in in production, and he knows his stage so well, and he's designed the lighting, so he knows exactly how to do every single part of it. And so I felt sometimes like it was almost like he was reading my mind. I would explain a shot, and we would discuss it, and he would get. Sometimes you have to kind of go with an approximation of what you have in mind because it's not exactly possible. Somehow he always nailed what I had in mind. It was wonderful. Like, it was so satisfying. But in the case of the lighting, it was a lot of like showing him references, giving him images, and then he would ask, like, he would show me how about this kind of light, or how about this, or he would take photos of a test that he would be doing, and then be like, oh, maybe a little bit less blue, a little bit more white here, or a little bit more. It really felt like a very, very close collaboration. And I was, again, so delighted with the results that we had. The amount of times that I giggled behind that monitor was anytime you feel something come straight from your brain and appear on a screen, it's just such a great feeling and a surreal experience. So I had a lot of that on Star Trek.
John and I got to visit the set just for a day or two, but we got to watch Akiva working with Glenn. And I got the impression Akiva would throw something to him and Glenn would be like, great, 5 minutes, give me 5 minutes. We'll make that happen. And then, but every time Akiva would be like, all right, Glenn, do your thing now. And then he'd be like a kid in a candy store, like doing his cinematographer shot. So he really seemed to like embrace both, like, I get to do my thing, but I'm going to do everything I can to make your vision happen too.
Yes.
Is that how you felt?
Extremely fun.
And I think that because they have to get used to doing so many different types of, it's not just like, oh, it's a sci-fi show and we're just doing sci-fi, or it's just action. They have an action episode, they have a musical episode, they have a horror episode, they have a comedy episode, and they'd come straight from filming a comedy episode because we didn't shoot this as the second one, we shot it as the fourth one, I think. So it's a very different look, and then you go into something completely different, and they have to be so adaptable, and they have to rely on the filmmaker to kind of bring it back to whatever this episode needs. So it felt very satisfying to have a whole crew who's so used to having a guest director come in and listening to a different voice all of a sudden.
Yeah. So you brought up, I don't want to gloss over it too much, you brought up you didn't go back and watch the other horror episodes until you were done with this. There's a lot of discussion about what Star Trek episodes are horror episodes. I would love to know your list of what you went back and watched after you finished filming this.
I did not go back and watch much afterwards, but I wish I did. And the list that I would use would be the same ones that are online. Yeah. I went to the Next Generation episode because I knew that was kind of the closest to what we'd done in some ways. Like just looking at the synopsis and from what I remembered from watching it at the time. And then just the fact that it's night terrors, it's But I don't know. Horror for Star Trek, I always think the Borg somehow. Or something much more psychological. Maybe there's one that I'm forgetting, but I can't think of many others that play that much on more body horror.
A lot of people use Empok Nor from Deep Space Nine, but yeah, that's psychological more than I don't know if there is beyond, like you said, the transporter from the motion picture. Like, not a ton of body horror going on.
I don't think there's anything like what we did to Sam Kirk.
No. Yes. I believe Jesse, our other host, his question on that to Robbie was, how dare you? And then asking how you actually accomplished it. And Robbie walked us through the rig and everything. But yeah, that was one of those, like, are they going to do this? Oh, they're doing it. Oh, the shot's still going on. Yeah. Okay, we're in new territory now. Understood.
And there's a part of it that's also, when you're doing TV, your production is yours, but post-production moves on back to Akiva and Henry. So if you have a shot that's mostly VFX, I've planned it, I've storyboarded it, I've mentioned what I'd like, but at the end of the day, they're the ones who are executing it with the VFX people. And so I was wondering how far they were going to push it with the the intestines coming out, and then that shot where he's just floating into space, which I was so enamored by. And they went there, they did it, and they even went. Yeah. There's a little detail that I had pitched that I was sure was never going to make it, but it's in there. There's little droplets of blood hitting the camera, which is a little bit of a fourth wall flourish that I was very excited to see they went with.
Well, speaking of getting your way, Robbie had mentioned that you were actually hired before you had finished writing the script fully and were having discussions with them. Did you have any input that made it into the final draft of the script at all? Do you know?
To be honest, I was hired. I didn't get the script right away. I didn't know that the script wasn't finished.
Oh,
So that's a Robbie secret. I don't. Yes, there was one scene. Yes, the teleporter scene we changed for various reasons. What was written originally, which was very cool, would have been very difficult to achieve, and we didn't really have time to make it look the way that it should have. So we went with something that was more inspired by the motion picture, and was all relying on her acting, which I think she did amazingly. Like those screams were so chilling. Oh my god.
Oh, the Ortegas.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's one big one we changed. I'm sure there's little details that we modified, but not much, really. Certainly not anything that had to do with the plot points, the storyline, like and the major scares. It was all there.
And Robbie also talked about the moment that La'an has her turn near the end, and how he mentioned it was like the moment on set was unnerving, and the two of you sharing some looks behind the camera of just like how deeply unsettling it was. Could you talk about directing Chrissy through La'an's journey, and does you having experience as a horror actress help with that?
I acted very briefly and very poorly, so that's very rarely my reference. I did it because literally, you're a 20-year-old blonde, people throw you in front of the camera. That was the extent of my acting experience. So I would never dare just be like, I would do it like this.
But can you at least relate with them on being covered in corn syrup or?
Oh yes, that I've done a lot. Yes,
Okay.
I've done my share of being covered in blood and screaming and dying on camera for sure. No, I think that the very brief acting experience has given me a lot of respect for what they do and how difficult it is and how fearless you have to be to do something like what Chrissy did there, because it's so easy to feel like you're just being silly or like it's such a big departure from what your character usually is. And La'an is usually very measured and she's usually very controlled, and it was so fun to push her in a completely different extreme. And Chrissy's so good, and I can't stress enough how fearless she is when it comes to, okay, I'll try that. And then she tries something and I try to push it further and she's like, sure, great, got it. And the way that she smiled, the way that she's kind of amused by, there's always a temptation to play villainous when you're doing something like the turn that she has at the very end. And I felt like it might be more fun if it looks like she's elated, like she's so happy to be there. Like she's like, oh, this is my place at last. And there's a smile that she gives that's just... Oh God, it's way more chilling. And speaking of smiles, by the way, Anson is also one who's you don't have to push very much to get amazing things. She goes on quite a journey, and those last scenes were we did a lot of takes, we did a lot of different variations, but she was pretty amazing on every one of them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of Anson, Robbie called you out on being. The sheer joy you had at filming the Chef Pike scene.
Yes.
Would you care to comment on that?
Sure. That joy started in prep. When we were trying to figure out how to do, I don't know how much he talked to you about this. I'm sure he must have mentioned the S word.
The S word.
The S word, yes. We couldn't figure out how to make those fingers cut properly and not feel like when you were cutting with the knife, like if you do that on prosthetics, like on latex, you try cutting with the knife and the prosthetics just kind of jump up, like bounce. And it looked terrible. And I remember Akiva saying, it should be like cutting through sausage. And they did a version that was made of sausage and covered it with just a layer of something that looked like skin. And that's what we used eventually. Like he's cutting through hot dogs, basically.
That is cool.
We did not get that, no.
It's very joyful just knowing that. But yes,
good,
it was
good.
very fun to see. Like everything came together. You had to have the hot dogs perfect. You had to have like the blood spurting in the right way. And then Ensign is wearing kind of a prosthetic that covers part of his hand and has a green spot so that in VFX they can replace the fingers with just looking like something is missing, like a big wound. And then the acting, the camera moves, like everything coming together. And Ensign did a few takes that were played more straight. And then I kind of asked if he could go more Jack Nicholson and more delighted with it. And he was, I mean, I feel like he really loves it when you give him something to do that's not just typical Captain Pike. And he just runs with it. And it was such a delight. And he did that maniacal smile that I could not get enough of. And in his eyes, when he's talking about, I can be the chef. And it's just, yeah, that was a fantastic scene to shoot, frankly.
It's a fantastic scene to watch.
Yes, it was.
It was definitely one of those. I was like, oh, he could cut his fingers out. Oh, they did that.
Yes. Yes.
And there used to be a shot where he's looking at his cut fingers before he passes out. And in some ways, I'm kind of glad that it's not in there because it's a little much, but it was hilarious. He was just so much fun to watch.
DVD.
I love how much you're talking about how happy it was you were behind the camera filming the darkest episode of Star Trek we've ever seen. Did you direct the 3 different stories and actors in different specific ways for the movie they were in, for the story they were in?
Well, they're all kind of in the same genre of horror. So technically it was fairly similar. Obviously there's differences in the way that those characters each react. But in the technical side of it, like one of the biggest things that the biggest adjustments is that on Star Trek you're used to, you go through a corridor, people walk fast, they have somewhere to go, they're talking as they do it. Like a hallway scene is going to last 5 seconds. And we have one of those at the end where we have Mbenga walking with Pike, and yeah, they walk at a clip, they know where they're going. And when you do horror, you have to make sure that your characters look scared. If people walk around the Griffin the way that they walk around the Enterprise, no one is going to be scared. So it was a lot of like, let's slow it down. No, you're walking slower. No, the camera is slower camera move. Everybody's just creeping around. And Chrissy took that to heart very quickly, and they would do a take walking all together. And before I even said anything, before we reset, she would be like, "It's a horror movie. Let's go slower." It was really great. But yeah, a lot of that for each one of them was like, "No, let's turn slower. You don't know what's behind you. You don't want to react right away. You're creeped out. You don't understand what it is. It's not a threat that you can understand and neutralize right away. So you have to move differently." And for each of them, that was one of the biggest. The biggest challenge was when they were all together, because I think that they're so used to, at that point, just having that kind of banter between them and just being very efficient.
Well, speaking of how the different characters react differently, like my favorite of the stories was the Spock one, because watching Spock specifically in a Vulcan like deal with the supernatural around him felt like Star Trek horror to me. That was like that perfect blend. And you had kind of mentioned like, but he's still got to be scared or it doesn't work. So can you talk about like how do you get Spock to show fear, and maybe just like approaching that very Vulcan lens of horror? Was that different? I mean, I know all horror movies usually have at least the skeptical character, but this felt kind of different in a way.
Yeah, I think part of it was slowing down the reactions for a lot of it. The way that, for example, when he's at the door and he puts down his flashlight, he goes very slowly, like he's just kind of trying to assess the environment. I felt when he was moving slower, it always felt like it was because he was calculating what was around him, which is a very Spock thing to do. So it worked very nicely with the character. But Ethan's so used to playing Spock. He knows that character inside out. So a lot of it was kind of just giving him space to do what he felt was going to be right in that scene, and then just adjust when it was needed, and just going, look, I would love to have a take that has a bigger reaction, or a take that has a more contained reaction. There were definitely moments where we knew we had to go really big. Like the moment when we cut his ear, we knew that he had to scream. We knew that he had to be like, and that felt like something that we haven't really seen from Spock. So that was really interesting. But in those moments, I really like to cut to black before we see too much. So it was just the beginning of his reaction, and then we cut, just like we did with Kirk when his reaction to Sam's death is interrupted, because I find it very striking when you have something that you can see how distraught they are, but you don't have to linger on it. Again, he's so attuned to how far he can go, and because he was going on that journey where we can push him to be more human, it made it easier, I think, for him to accept that he could go bigger than he usually does. And then until he is brought back by logic and brought back by kind of just being centered into his Vulcan side. But it was really fun, because also his section is the one that feels the most like a nightmare. Like, it has such weird nightmare logic, and especially when the cavalry arrives and they take him out into the hallway, and then they come back to T'Pring, and then suddenly it's kind of Pike who's the villain, and all of that was really, you almost don't, you can have a vision for how it's going to end up, but you don't really have a feel for how it's all going to come together until you see it in the edit. So that was also really satisfying, was kind of seeing, oh my God, it feels like such a weird nightmare logic. And yeah, it was, that was one of my favorite parts to film, was all the stuff in sickbay.
Oh, okay. How much conversation went into how badly do Vulcan ears bleed when you cut them off? Like, was there ever going to be like a little geyser of green blood coming out, or?
There's no such thing as too much blood, generally speaking. My bigger issue was that the blood
Good
was
philosophy.
green, and it doesn't feel as painful as if the blood was red for us humans, I think. So it was more discussions about what kind of green, but the green had already been established, I think, in other episodes. So we kind of inherited that very kind of comic book like green, but it looks great, I think. And then it's kind of how much do we want still on his like neck and in the following scenes, and yeah.
Speaking of bringing him back to logic, I do love his chant, because it's the Vulcan chant of logic, and Vulcans are kind of creepy in general, but like when he's chanting, I feel like it feels like something straight from The Evil Dead or Mola Ram chanting from Temple of Doom. Like, it feels creepy and part of this movie within an episode. Like, did you guys develop that chant? Had that already been written when you came on, or?
That had been written. I love that you see it like that. I do feel like there's something that feels like a witchcraft ritual.
Yeah.
We kind of shot it mostly from the point of view of the threat that could still happen to him. Okay. So it was mostly kind of building what T'Pring is doing while he was in his own mind. But I love that you see it that way.
It works.
I mean, this, like, I had the same reaction several times to this episode. Obviously, it's meant to be a psychological. It's meant to mess with you, but I loved how much it was just questioning the entire time. Like, all right, what's real, what's not, who's good, who's not, who's like, and until we get the turn at the very end. Robbie mentioned that you were really adept at knowing which shots and moments to use. Like you mentioned, cutting off reactions is more effective than dwelling on them. But he mentioned you were really good at determining where to use your time and budget. Can you talk about like one shot that was really important for you to get just right, and where you decided to spend more time, or a series of shots or things like that?
Well, everything that builds up to a scare has to be just so. It feels sometimes, I feel like a lot of people look down on horror and feel like it's one of the easiest emotions to get out of somebody, but I think it's very much a misunderstanding, because for something to feel atmospheric and feel like a scare is earned, you have to put a lot of work into what lenses to use. Like, it's a very precise kind of, if you go with a wider lens, you're going to see more of the environment. It's going to look a little bit more deformed, but you can't use that all the time. So you kind of specifically pick what shots to use that for. A wide lens is kind of one of those, I'm very bad at explaining these things, but it shows you more of the environment around you. And the wider you go with the lens, the more kind of fisheye, deformed it gives you the image. And sometimes I love to put one of those lenses just right in someone's face. So it looks like, when Spock is on the table, for example, you go with a wider lens and it looks kind of like he's almost a little bit deformed, and it gives a slightly surreal feel to it. Sometimes it's picking a wide that's seen from a bigger distance or from behind something, so it feels like someone's creeping and looking into it. A lot of it is the pace at which you're going. A lot of it is when to go into a close-up, and when you go into a close-up, how long your lens has to be so that you can see something in the background or you can't. Like there's a lot of playing with very technical details, and everything for that has to be just right. But one of the shots that we did the most takes on, I think, it was probably the ear cutting. That was a pretty crucial one to get right. And it was crucial to get Ethan's reaction, but you had to have I wanted to have his reaction in the same shot as the cutting of the ear. So we didn't have to go from a close-up to another close-up. So it was finding the angle where the camera could see his face properly, but also still see the ear very properly. And then adding to that difficulty is the fact that the way we did it, they built a prosthetic on top of his ear that was kind of pre-cut. So Gia had to cut at a specific spot that was just above his ear. And she was so scared of cutting into his ear. And obviously he was quite attached to his ear, so he also was a little worried about how it was going to work out. So the more takes we did, the more it felt like, no, you kind of really have to go for it. And just like, you know, I wanted it to not feel like a clean snip. I wanted it to feel like she had to really hack at it. But the more you do that, the closer you get to his ear. So it was, it was a stressful moment. But it was also the moment you know you get the shot, the moment I don't know, sometimes you watch something and it's not quite right, and then you get the take and you know it's the take, and it's that satisfying moment of, it's come together. Mm-hmm. We know it's going to work. And when we hit that with that one, it was, I think it was happy all around that we could stop hacking at Ethan's ears.
One of my favorite support actors of this show, who makes her return this season, is Gia as T'Pring. I just think she brings such a nuance to this character that could easily be one note. And even here, where she's just a figment of the imagination, she delivers such a great performance. Can you talk about working with her on that, and in general with the characters who are figments, but we don't know that at first? How did you kind of direct that at all?
Gia is awesome. And it's funny how when you don't know actors other than through the characters they play, it was the case for Ethan too. Although Ethan I met a little bit earlier in pre-production, we had a couple of talks, but I didn't get to chat much with Gia. But I see them as Vulcans, I imagine they're going to be very serious and very detail oriented and so the moment that, something goes wrong or something and you have a Vulcan who just goes, fuck, it's hilarious. And you're realizing, I'm talking to a regular human being. It's really dumb, but I had a little bit of that. And Gia's very funny. And she's also very open to, this was such a weird role for her to play, and we did some kind of interesting things with cameras moving around her and things like that. And she's just cool for all of it. And finding the balance between your figment of the imagination, so you can be a little different from what you would usually be. Always the way we looked at it was, you are seen through the eyes of Spock. Mm-hmm. You are what Spock thinks you are. So she could be a little different from what she would usually play. And it was the same with the way that he looks at when the cavalry arrives, when Pike is there. It's hilarious to think that that's his vision of Pike, for example, or that he sees Una as someone who would say, I've never liked T'Pring. There's a psychological study behind there that could happen. But it was, anytime there was any question of how do I do this and is this aligned with what the character usually is, it's, you're seen through the eyes of Spock, or you're seen through the eyes of Kirk. So it's going to be a little different.
So this cast is obviously full of fantastic actors, and we never like to play favorites, but as a horror director, did you have any, you're like, that's a horror actor right there? Anybody who you just work with them, this person could be in horror movies for the rest of their lives and be that kind of star?
Honestly, I would cast any of them in a horror movie. But I think that Chrissy really embraced it. I think she was great. I would cast her as a villain, for sure. I'd be super curious to see what Ethan would do as a villain. Ooh. I think that would be so against type that it would be really fun. But he's very good at taking things in different directions from what you expect. So I think that he would be. And they're kind of, Paul we've seen in horror material. He's played vampires. He's obviously he knows that inside out. But it's those were the three main characters I played with. So it was,
Who's your Scream Queen?
yeah, but it would be Chrissy,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. But again, I would happily cast any of them in horror. I think they would
Yeah.
all be so much fun.
And we asked, we were interviewing for another one of the episodes yesterday, but were you disappointed not to get to work with Carol Kane on a ghost story?
Oh, what would Pelia
I was
do
disappointed
here?
not to meet her, but she would be hilarious in horror.
Yeah, I was like, you can't put Pelly in this episode because we'd just be laughing the whole time.
It's one of the things that they really did really nicely, I felt, at script stage, like conceptually, that they managed to give a little bit of humor to this episode, but they didn't go too far in it. So they really kind of, Star Trek, usually whatever the genre you're making, there's going to be moments of humor. And they went very light on that in this one. And I think that was a great decision because it really allowed us to create that atmosphere and not break the tension too often. So yeah, it would have been difficult.
Does come through is like that horror humor of like Pike going crazy and stuff.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
it fit. Yeah. Well, speaking of all that, do you have a favorite horror movie? What, or maybe top 3 you'd suggest people check out? You can't say your own.
Oh my God, that's difficult. The one I usually go back to is The Fly, the David Cronenberg version of The Fly, which is one of the first horror movies I watched. Back at the time, I was obsessed with Jeff Goldblum because of Jurassic Park.
Okay.
And so I saw that he was in the horror movie. Oh my God, I got to see that. And it took me years to be able to watch it because my parents wouldn't let me. And because, I had to find a tape somehow and watch it in sections when they were out of the house. And sorry, Mom. But I remember watching that and being really disturbed by the fact that you can watch something that's disgusting and scary and shocking, and at the same time, it makes you cry. And it felt really emotional watching it. And I still feel like it's one of the most beautiful love stories ever put on screen. But it is also a proper horror movie and proper body horror. And that juxtaposition of special effects and emotions was really what stuck with me. And that's always what I try to achieve. And that's why Star Trek is so good for this. It's that Star Trek is all about the characters. So obviously every scare in here is going to be based on the specificities of the character and the worst nightmare for each of those characters. So it's the fact that it's very psychological and very tied to those character emotions. So The Fly would be one. A big inspiration for this one, and one that I come back to for a lot of shows. I always have references from The Haunting from 1963.
Okay.
Classic ghost story, just beautifully shot. Again, one that I saw pretty early on, so it made a big impression, but it plays with those wide lenses I was talking about. It's just the cinematography is impeccable, and it shows you very, very little. There's not a lot of scares, but the atmosphere is so thick. And it's to me, it's a great example of how to build tension and not necessarily showing you how to release that tension, but there's moments that are just really influential that you've seen since in other horror movies that have been copied. I really recommend that one. I don't know. There's so much. I'm trying to think of what else serves as inspiration for this one. There was definitely some shots from The Haunting. Yeah, watch The Devil's Backbone. Devil's Backbone's really good.
I haven't yet. I need to. It's definitely like
I think
one of
that's my
blind spots.
favorite Del Toro.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, it plays with like the supernatural in a way that's not necessarily what you expect.
Nice.
It's not necessarily the source of scares, but there's a lot of atmosphere. There's a lot of beauty to it. There's a lot of it has a lot to say about human nature. It's beautiful. Yeah. It's a really good one.
Yeah, I love Del Toro's approach to horror because of that, like you said. I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking the other kind of nice thing about Star Trek and horror is you can gut James Kirk. You can cut Spock's ears off. Yeah. And as long as they make it back to the medbay on Enterprise, they're going to be fine and ready for next week's adventure. Like that's unique in the horror realm. So that was... I'm glad you had fun with that in this episode.
Yeah.
I don't think that Sam Kirk could have come back.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking the same thing. Like, usually we'll ask, like, is it weird for writers to have to write characters that we know what comes next for them, so you can't mess them up too bad? But like Cam said, it must have been nice to not have to worry about that because it's like, meh,
You can
the
mess
ship's
them
over
up
there.
psychologically.
Yeah. Yep.
And pretty physically, and still they just run a little light over them and they're okay.
Yeah.
I like what Mbenga says at the end, that physically they're going to be okay, but mentally,
There's going to be some scars. Yeah, I mean, no,
there's going to be some scars.
Yeah.
we've been promised this episode will have ramifications that are not over yet. So
Nice.
we look forward to that. Yes.
So do I. I haven't seen the others, so.
Now, I apologize, Axel. I don't think we warned you about this. Our final question is, do you have a favorite shot from this episode?
Oh my God. Yes, I do. It'll be to bring sitting up behind Spock. Yes.
That is a good one.
Very good shot. And I'd like you did that really well. Like the sitting up behind Spock, the running across the hallway behind Kirk and La'an as they're walking down. You are super skilled at those kind of just the deep background stuff. Like I've watched the episode 3 times and still like
Nice.
twitch each time I watch those shots. So
Nice. That one, the figure behind is a contortionist called Troy James. He's phenomenal. I recommend looking up on YouTube his audition for, I think it was America's Got Talent.
Okay.
He's a contortionist, and he's incredible. And it was almost like let's rein him in instead of letting him do his thing, because he can do all kinds of crazy like backwards walking on his hands, like insane. It was just, I just wanted something a little bit disquieting.
Yeah.
But he gave us 15 different versions of what he could do there. It was really cool. And it was the timing of trying to have them finish their dialogue and turning the flashlight just as he's leaving. And the timing of that one was difficult to get.
I noticed the timing. That was good. I meant to ask about that, who played that, and just forgot to make it on my notes. So speaking of that, is there anything else about the episode you'd like to tell us that we didn't ask about?
I would say there's 2 or 3 figures towards the beginning, like I mentioned, who are hidden that you probably won't see. But I'll give you a hint on what one of them is. When they're leaving the engineering room, they're going through the first hallway. Look up above them.
Okay. Very cool. And did anything like Spock's ears, anything land on the cutting room floor that we didn't get to see in this
Nothing
episode?
big, like no, not really. No.
Okay.
I don't think there might be some good like outtakes, maybe some good bloopers. There's a moment when the doors close in the sickbay and Ethan had to run towards the door, and the shoes have very slippery soles. And he ate shit, and it was he was, he kind of gets up and he's like, I'm fine, I'm totally fine. Oh, it's nothing. And then later on, I saw that he opened his elbow and.
Oh, professional. What was the original transporter scene?
Ortega's was going to be transferred into a wall. She was going to be fused into a wall.
Oh,
Philadelphia experiment style.
yes.
Which was really cool, and I love the idea. But it's very difficult to build an entire wall on the downside of going into a different genre every time is that you have 2 weeks to prep and 2 weeks to shoot, like a little bit more than 2 weeks to shoot. But 2 weeks to prep, that's not a lot of time to build an entire wall that would be molded after, like, which parts of the body can we see. And so we started looking into that, and then it just kind of felt like it wasn't going to give us what we were hoping for. So instead it kind of played on her performance and on her screams, and we did a lot of takes of that, and that was kind of on me. I just wanted to make sure that we had what we needed, but I felt bad because she felt like she made it look like she really was in pain. It was very disturbing to watch.
Well, what we got was pretty disturbing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Well done.
She's such a trooper. She'll just go to those places and look like she's being broken into pieces and scream, and then she just kind of shakes it off and go, I'm fine, I can totally do another one. and I think she was good at hiding the fact that it was taking a toll. So I'm glad that we didn't do too much of it. But yeah, what a trooper. Like all of them, they're absolutely amazing.
Well, Axel, thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to Star Trek. Welcome to joining the ranks of so many fantastic directors. We really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun. There's few things I love discussing more than this episode. So.
Before we go, for our video viewers, I have to know, whoever's behind your left shoulder, do they have a name? Because they keep poking. No, oh, sorry, the other left. You're right, probably.
Oh.
Yes, who is? They keep peeking out.
Blue one?
Yes.
So the blue guy is just some antique that I found that I really liked.
okay.
He has long lashes. He looks beautiful. I love him.
Yes.
There's a Frankenstein monster in the back behind.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This lady is from The Haunting of Bly Manor, and the
Okay.
portrait is from that too.
Ah.
And then this monster in the corner is from a movie I made for Blumhouse called The Manor.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this huge guy here is from a 90s horror movie called Wishmaster that I used to be obsessed
Oh,
with.
man.
I just showed that one to my son. That was what we watched after Friday the 13th.
Oh, cool.
Was
Well,
Wishmaster.
that's a horror Mazda that falls on Ted Raimi and releases the
that's
Opal.
what-
That's that guy.
Man, I got to watch Wishmaster again. It's
Oh,
been
yes,
a long
you do.
time.
Wishmaster
It
is
is
so much fun.
the 90s horror movie. It exists in that time in all the best and worst ways.
That's fantastic.
Well, thank you again, for your tour of your amazing house. Hopefully, if maybe you're coming back next season, we'll speak again.
Yep.
Perhaps. Thank you guys so much. It's so nice to meet you both.
You as well.
Thank you.